Hey everybody, welcome to our What's New in Simcenter Femap 2401 webinar hosted by SDA Software. Today, we're going to talk through some exciting features, but first we're going to give a quick background of structures.aero, and that'll probably be familiar for most of you, and then we'll talk through a lot of the updates. But before we get into this quick overview, I want to mention if you do have any questions, feel free to ask them in the Q&A section of the Teams webinar, and I've got that pulled up, and I'll answer them as we go, so we can kind of keep the questions on the current topic. But obviously, if you think of something later, it's totally okay to ask it at the end or out of order. So I just want to thank you guys for being here, and we'll go ahead and get started. So what's new in Femap 2401? Well, the first thing is not it's kind of small, but basically there's an accelerator to Teamcenter rebranding. So a lot of the teams or old accelerator labeled things in Femap now say Teamcenter. And then we'll talk about a new option for picking matching holes when you're manipulating geometry. And then we'll dive into the three big updates, in my opinion, for 2401, which are the new Layup Builder, which is a completely new methodology for creating layups and properties. And then we'll talk through the Add Plies to Mesh tool, which isn't as expansive of an update as far as like the user interface goes, but I think it's a really powerful tool that a lot of people will use if you use layups. And then we'll also talk about a new region type, the incompressible fluid region in Femap, and why it's added and what it supports. And a sneak preview of that is that it adds basically sloshing capabilities. And then we'll talk about some analysis, set improvements, solver support, a few post-processing things, and then API improvements, and just miscellaneous extra things. So a quick thing about SDA, which is the company I'm a part of. We're a team of 23 engineers, primarily aerospace and mechanical engineering backgrounds. And we are all, at least all the analysis engineers here, are experts at Femap, and we use Femap and Nastran every day. Some of our recent projects, if you're familiar with our webinars, you probably know, but we work with a lot of different areas in the industry, a lot of space projects, a lot of aircraft projects, and then again, a lot of UAVs as well. So our most recent big projects are Dream Chaser, working on the analysis team there, and then also XB1, which if you're following along in the news, they just had their first flight. All right, so let's dive into Simcenter Femap 2401 updates. First thing we'll talk about is kind of the managed environments rebranding. And this is quick, but really it's just that the accelerator brand is now rolled into the Teamcenter brand. So anything in Femap that was labeled accelerator now says Teamcenter. All right, moving right along, the geometry updates for this one are a little light, but I think this new addition is pretty helpful. So now you can obviously, if you have a plate with many different sizes of holes, maybe a bunch of different fastener types and sizes, you can pick matching holes. So this is helpful for maybe you need to have a shear pin hole for some reason in your model, but maybe not a bunch of pilot holes or connector attachments. So this is helpful for removing similar size holes. Pretty straightforward here. All right, let's get into the new Layup Builder. This is one of my favorite updates for this version, and it seems like it's going to be really powerful and ultimately save a lot of people a lot of time. So this is what they call the new Layup Builder, and what it is a way to, instead of creating a bunch of layups and a bunch of properties on your own in Femap and then assigning them to your surfaces, or if you've already meshed something, your elements, this will basically create all the properties for you, and the inputs that you tell it are primarily like what the plies are, what their thicknesses and angles are, and then the key thing here is that you pick the elements that have that specific ply. So this is not a dialog box, actually. It's a dockable pane, kind of like the data surface editor or the data table. It's like that, where you can kind of move it around on the screen, put it on a second monitor, kind of have it floating out in space or locked into a certain region of Femap. So let's go ahead and check it out. So this is just a wing box that I've meshed up with plot planar elements. And normally I would either create all my properties, my layups and my properties, and assign them to the surfaces, and then mesh that, and then the elements would inherit the property. Or maybe I would go ahead and mesh it and just assign the properties to the elements directly. But this new workflow works a little bit different, where you pick where the plies are going to go, and then Femap generates the layups for you. So it's really cool, and I think it's going to be really helpful if you have very complicated layups, lots of ply drops, that type of thing, where you're dropping maybe like one or a couple plies out at once, and you just have a lot of properties. I think this is where it will help you a lot. So let's go ahead and check the tool out. It's under File, Tools, Layup Builder. Okay, I'm seeing some questions on audio. Sounds like we're good there. All right. So as I said, this is the Layup Builder. It's a dockable pane, so you can kind of drag it around wherever you want, dock it in wherever. I'll probably use it kind of out on its own. And I like to keep it up front. So we've got a bunch of options up here. The first one that I like to do is, if you're doing this from scratch, it would be new layup stack, but I've pre-created a few layups, or stacks actually. So I'm just going to pick my wing stack, and I've got 7 plies of T300 fabric at a 0-degree angle, and I've picked all these elements. So if we go ahead and kind of preview what that looks like, it's the whole wing. So I'm going to check my ply info, and it's going to tell me whether it thinks there are going to be any errors when we generate these layups. And for the most part, they seem to be fine, but for the stack, there seems to be some errors. Elements have inconsistent normals, and elements are non-manifold. I don't think this is going to matter for the demo, but if we were doing this, we would probably want to look into maybe aligning the normals across the elements. But the big thing is here that you actually do have to have your elements defined already, so that's why I went ahead and meshed them with plot planar elements. So if I go ahead and click this button, Build Layups, it asks me if it's okay to update the model. Yep. And a key thing is that you always want to save your stack, because if you do change something and then close out of here, I don't think it saves it for you. So that's maybe something I'll suggest in the future as an improvement, just so you don't lose information. So I'm going to exit out of here. It's colored these properties. They're all the same, but that makes sense because there's only one property here. All right, so let's say now that we want to add a chord panel region in the skins. I'm going to open up the Layup Builder, reload my stack. I've already created this stack here, and you can see I've added a core ply here, and I've only applied it to these elements. We can show those elements here. I've picked like a region minus one of the elements on the boundary to kind of account for the core ramp. And when I check this, I get all green, the same errors. That's okay. I'll go ahead and click Build Layups. It's going to create 3 properties. It should really be creating 2. I think the third is because of the normals are flipped, so it's creating a separate property, but that's okay for now. And so it's not going to color the properties for me. I'll have to go do that myself, which is okay. And here are my different properties and layups. So if I highlight this, this is one of my skin layups, and this is my chord panel. Let's edit this layup. And you can see it's got all these plies and the core, whereas the skin has just my 7 plies of T300 fabric. All right, so let's say we want to go add maybe a spar cap. We'll go back to the Layup Builder. We'll load this layup that I have here. And for this one, I've added in 6 plies of uni to a specific subset of elements. You can see the core is still in here on a different subset of elements. And we'll go ahead and build these layups, close, recolor the properties. And now I have my spar caps on the front and the F spar. I have my chord region in the center of these wing bays, and then I still have my regular skin layups on the outside. We can go, here's the spar cap, and we can see that it has my skin plies, my uni plies, and then another skin, but it doesn't have the core. So it is functioning as we wanted. So this could be a way to generate everything at the beginning, but you can also use it to like switch back and forth between different configurations. So that's another cool thing that I thought of that makes this a really cool feature. Another really nice feature about this is that you can use it to kind of query or interrogate where your layup is going to go. Or you could pick an element and say, hey, what plies is this element going to have? So we can go in and do that real quick. If we pull back the Layup Builder. And we can say, I want to pick an element and I want it to show me which plies that element is going to have. So let's just say the cap. I think I picked the wrong one. Yeah, here we go. So I picked the cap and it highlights everything that's going to be where that element is. So that's kind of cool. It can help you maybe just like check and verify that you have this set up properly. And there's a lot of other cool features here that I don't have time to demo now, but obviously you can copy this to clipboard, send it to Excel. There's a bunch of options, add plies at multiple different places in the laminate, duplicate. And then another thing I wanted to mention here is that the global ply column, and this is really, I think, something very useful as well. Previously, global plies weren't as helpful, at least to me, but I think this new Layup Builder makes them tremendously helpful because you can kind of track them across multiple layups here. So I think global plies actually make there's like a much stronger use case for them in the Layup Builder context. And then I did want to mention another thing here is that if you use FiberSim, there's actually some strong functionality related to that where you can import FiberSim files and it'll pull it into the Layup Builder. So if that is something that you use, I would highly suggest pulling up the What's New documentation and reading through that. I won't cover it here, but I just wanted to let you know that that does exist, and there's some really cool functionality associated with that that you could leverage. All right, moving along. The second big improvement that I really think I'll use a lot is the add plies to mesh command. And this is something that I've honestly been wanting for a while. And honestly may have suggested at some point, but I know like a lot of people have been asking for something like this. And this is going to be helpful when you have a lot of different ply or properties in an area, but you want to say add maybe an extra skin ply to the top of all of these. If you're going to do that to like an entire wing, that would take a long time to edit all those properties, and you probably would have to write your own API to do it efficiently. But this is like a native tool, and I'll kind of show you how it works here. So let's say we want to add maybe a reinforcement, maybe along this rib here. This command lives under the model laminates add plies to mesh tab. And if we click on these two elements and add a few, grow this selection, we can see this is we're going to add a single ply on the outside to all these elements. But the key thing is we're crossing a property boundary. So, this wouldn't be too hard if maybe we were doing this in the middle of this chord panel where we would just like copy the property and the layup manually and then update the property ID for those elements. But where you cross a bunch of property boundaries, that manual process is going to take a lot longer. So here's the tool. We can add it to the top or the bottom of the laminate. And if you have global plies, you can toss it in above or below. So that's super helpful. And another big reason to start using global plies in this release. And then obviously you can toss in like a layup stack or an individual ply material. Let's go ahead and toss our own in. We'll make it fabric. We'll say 2 plies and an angle of 0. I have to turn thickness off. And I've got the feature lines showing property boundaries, so you can see that here. And obviously, it hasn't changed the color of the properties, which is probably something I'll suggest as an update for the next release, just so that if you don't have the feature lines, you might not ever know that there's a different property there. So we'll go ahead and color these randomly. And you can see I have 2 new properties defined, and we can go look to see what it's done here. So on the chord area, we've added 2 plies to the top of the layup, and it's actually in the form of a layup itself. So this is kind of helpful for showing like, hey, these are the actual 2 plies that were added by that function. And then if we wanted to get rid of this, we could just convert this to plies, and it would get rid of the layup stack and just make them plies on their own. We can check the other one. And you see we have the same thing here, but not in the core region. So I think this is going to be a really cool feature and save a lot of people some time and probably save you from banging your head against the wall in some cases. So yeah, it's really cool that the Femap team is kind of listening to the users and adding features that are requested, because I think it just shows like a healthy and developing developer environment. All right, so the next thing we'll talk about is the new capabilities for tanks with the defined fluid mass method. And what this is a new way to represent fluid-filled structures and also include the effects of sloshing in modal and frequency response analysis. So I think this is something new that Nastran added maybe in the last release, and Femap is now adding support for the new Nastran capabilities. Previously, the only thing available was the virtual fluid mass method, where you would, I think, just pick the surfaces, like the wetted fluid surface or the wetted structure surface. But in this new update, you actually represent the fluid with solid elements, and then you can see here you would pick the surface that's the free fluid, and when you're actually in the region selection dialog. So the defined fluid mass method is complicated or it is most helpful for complicated fluid volume shapes. And then the other advantage is that it can take into account the effects of sloshing, whereas the virtual fluid mass method could not. So here's the new region dialog box. You can see options for selecting virtual fluid or the incompressible fluid surface, and then a couple options here. This is a very familiar dialog, but key thing is that there's a new region being added to Femap. So here you can see this free surface region in orange, and then there's solid elements in the bottom half of this tank surrounded by just the structure, which is plate elements. And this is kind of an example of the output that you might get. This shows like the free fluid surface modes. And this kind of shows you how you might be able to take into account sloshing via like a superposition of the different fluid modes. All right, moving into meshing. This is a smaller update, but I think helpful, and most people will probably use this on occasion. So the change here is that when you're measuring a surface, the growth factor now, I think it now works, or maybe this is new, but I know I've seen the growth factor when you're meshing solids. So now it actually does affect your surface mesh growth as well. So here's an example of what's going on here. With no growth ratio, you kind of have the same mesh sizing in the acreage areas away from any curves that have been sized. You have the same mesh sizing as, let me to kind of point it out here. You have the same mesh sizing kind of in the acreage areas as along the curves that have been sized. So if you have a massive panel with like a small feature on it, you might end up with like a small mesh all over the place. But now that you can specify a growth ratio, the mesh will actually transition into a larger size, so you don't have massive mesh resolution over a big part when you might only need it in like a corner or something like that. And this option is available under solids too, and that's kind of how I'm familiar with it. So it looks like they're kind of just extending that to also work for plates. And you can see here, you have the same thing available for a tet or a triangle mesh. You can see here the mesh size on this curve is the same as in the middle of this panel, whereas over here it actually gets to grow and you have a little bit less resolution here where you normally don't need it, like you would on like a high curvature or like a sharp edge or something like that. All right, let's move into some of the performance improvements. Femap has been working on the unified graphics architecture update for a while. I think maybe for the past like 3 versions, and with this version, I think they're probably getting close. It seems like to being done unifying everything. And in this version, they've added nodes into the unified architecture. So the idea here is that like once this is complete, you won't have to switch between best possible or like turn on and off performance graphics to get different graphics settings to work. It should just all work under the unified architecture. And again, in this release, nodes have been added to the UGA pipeline. And these are all the entities that were already supported through 2301 and 2306. All right, moving into analysis and solver support. This is one of my personal favorite updates because I'm going to brag a little bit. I suggested this, so I already see some improvements to my suggestions. So I know that this can probably go a little further, but something I noticed when I was using Femap is that like you can edit a lot of things in the editor, but you couldn't access any information about analysis sets. Like with groups, you can pick like elements, nodes, coordinate systems through the entity editor for that group. But for some reason, the analysis set would just, if you clicked on an analysis set, the entity editor would be blank. So now it actually shows you the title, the solver that it's using, the analysis type, and then the two big ones for me are the results destination, because I use this one a lot, and the active run group, which we also use quite a bit. So the results destination is going to like specify an alternate someplace other than the default for your results to go. And I like to, like if I have my modfim in a folder, I don't want my results to be in the same folder because it'll kind of just clog it up. So I'll create like a subfolder called results and just put all my results in there. And so this is great for like checking to make sure that that's still the right folder that I need. And then the run group is great for like maybe you have a couple different run groups and you're looking at some trades and stuff like that. You can get really confused and mixed up, like what run group is actually active for different analysis sets. So I think this is going to be a great way to like cycle through the analysis sets pretty quick and see which run group. So ultimately, I think these are two updates that will help you check the model a little bit, and it'll help prevent like the wrong run group from being used, which I know that's happened to me quite a lot. And if you're not familiar with run groups, I'll show you where that exists now. We can go ahead and edit this analysis set. It's under bulk data options, and there's the option to write out a portion of the model. So maybe you want to leave out like a certain fastener. You can create a group and then exclude a fastener and then toss that group into this entry here. And you can basically run like a portion of the model from the actual model itself. So this is extremely helpful. We do this all the time. But if you have multiple run groups and you're like you have like a bunch of trades you're running, it's easy to lose sight of like what actually is selected. And you have to like double click this, scroll through maybe like a big list of analysis sets, come down to the bulk data, double click that, and just to see what it is. So with this new option, if you click here, it's going to tell you where your results destination is. And it also gives you an option for picking where to put your results, but I think it's probably a lot easier to just through the file explorer, find where you want and copy the path rather than like digging through this tree, which can get kind of clunky. Yeah, so this is actually where the run group is set, and then this is where the results destination is set. I don't think I covered that earlier. The results destination is set under executive solution here. So the solver direct output 2 is tied to results destination, and then the bulk data portion of model to write is tied to this second option here. All right. I think in the future, I'd like to see like maybe the global constraints, because to get to those, you also have to go through this tree pretty deep. So if they could list the global requesting conditions, constraints, and loads, I think that would be also very helpful, as well as maybe something about the output requests, but there's a lot going on here. I don't know if it's possible to fit that all in the entity editor box. But if you have any suggestions, feel free to pass them along. All right, so another analysis set manager improvement is that obviously they've added the incompressible fluid options tree to be able to handle all the different options available for like the incompressible fluid stuff that we talked about earlier. So there's a lot of new stuff there as well. And then for Abacus specifically, if there are any Abacus users out there, they've separated out the initial step and the like following steps. So previously it was kind of like a little confusing in 2306 and below, but now you have like an actual initial step region to start off with and then define the rest. All right, so the next thing is the command finder improvements. This is something that was added in 2301. And if we pull up Femap real quick, it's like this box in the upper right-hand corner. And basically this command finder has been improved over the last few versions. And I think this is like very helpful for people who like maybe might just be starting out with Femap and you might not know where like all these different things are, because there's a lot buried in this like tree up here. And you can go like pretty deep into some of these like trees here. So being able to search for like delete, load, it gives you a bunch of different options. So you would use this like maybe like you think like, oh man, like I think I should be able to do this in Femap, but like I don't know where to look. And it's and where I am looking, I can't find it. So I've been in that situation a lot where like I know this exists, but I just don't know where it is. Um, so and it even like will like if you leave your mouse here, it'll like pull it up actually in the tree where this command exists. So that's pretty helpful. Um, and I think in this new release, they've just made it like more contextually aware and added like a lot more keywords so that like if you type in property, it'll find more options for you. And then they've also added a hyperlink, which will allow you to like pull up the online documentation for this specific tool. And then another kind of cool thing is that now it'll search within the custom and user tools. So you know what? Let's test that out. Let's say we want to look for geometry group expand. Yeah, so this is kind of cool actually. It will pull up the custom tools, and if we hover over it, oh, it's not going to hover over it for us, but um, yeah, that's cool that it'll search through your custom and user tools. Actually, I didn't realize this before, but like this is actually, I wonder if it'll, oh, that's cool. It also searches my user tools. So um, kind of a quick shortcut way to get through some of your personal APIs that you might have written. I know like I use this one a lot and I kind of have to navigate through like a couple different folders. So this is actually pretty helpful. All right, and the last thing we'll talk about quickly is the new license management dialog here. And so what this is basically a place to manage your license or maybe switch between like a dongle or a demo license or just point it to a different server. previously, if you wanted to switch between a dongle or like the FlexLM license server, you had to go like dig within the Femap install and find like Go dongle or Go network. So now you don't have to do that. You just open up Femap, manage licensing, and just click one of these radio dialogues here, or radio buttons. And I think that's under Help, Manage Licensing, right? And it'll tell you you can test your connection. It'll give you a bunch of information. So yeah, I think this is kind of helpful for like say you want to update to 24.01 and you don't really remember what you did 3 years ago to install the last version. And you're like, well, I don't know what type of licensing to pick. Like, well, now it doesn't really matter. You can just pick something and then pull this up later and kind of debug the licensing to get it to run. All right, so that's it for this this What's New webinar. If I did collect some resources here, especially on the new sloshing capabilities, there's some really good content in the Nastran Advanced Dynamic Analysis User's Guide. And it talks about like when you would use the virtual fluid mass method versus the new defined fluid mass method, which again, the virtual fluid mass is where you pick like the wetted structure versus defined fluid mass is where you would actually mesh the fluid and then assign a region for the free fluid surface. And then also there's a lot of things that I had to cut out for this webinar. What's new improvements. So there's the What's New documentation is on Support Center. And then if you are extremely interested, there's also the Femap README, which has like a line-by-line change log. And then there's also a complete bug fix list, which will, like, for example, if you've submitted a bug report or something, you can go see if that's been corrected in this version. And we'll send these links out, but if you want to get to them in the meantime, it's on the Support Center Femap webpage. All right, if there are any questions, looks like we might have a few. I'll go ahead and answer these, but if you do have any questions, feel free to email me, or if you'd like a pricing estimate, or if you'd like to see a demo, feel free to contact Keith Brennan. We'd both be very happy to help. So I do have two questions. One is, can global plies be added under layups? Didn't see a column. So if you're actually editing a layup, I think there is an option for, yeah. So it's not like on the default page, but if you right click the column here, there's an option to show global ply ID. So once you do generate your plies, your global ply will show up here. And probably if I had used global plies when I was using the Layup Builder, it probably would automatically turn this on, I hope. But if it doesn't show up, you can just right click and turn the column on. And then another question was, does this new Layup Builder work to get layer data and ply drop regions from FiberSim? It does. And if there's enough interest, we might do a separate webinar on those capabilities. But it does for sure. Like Femap has spent the time to make sure that it can read a bunch of information from FiberSim and pull that in and generate all the layups. So yeah, that's definitely something worth reading more about in the What's New documentation, because there is a lot of extra capability there that I just haven't covered today. All right, that's it for today. I'm going to go ahead and check the chat. It looks like there are no more questions right now. Thank you guys for tuning in. And again, feel free to email me or our SDA Software President for questions on pricing or demos.